Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. It feels like there is a change in the air. Spring has officially, well, it's not officially started, but it feels like it is coming. And that can only mean one thing. The Formula One season is right around the corner. We have 2 weeks to go. This time in 2 weeks, we will have seen the opening round. We'll have watched the opening round of the 2025 season. We will have our first winner of 2025. And I am excited. I am very, very excited. Now, obviously, with the opener being 2 weeks away, that means we have also had 3 days of testing in Bahrain, which is why we're here today. We are going to be getting into everything that we sort of learned from these 3 days of testing. But before we get into that, I want to quickly talk about the news that came out from the World Motorsport Council meeting, which happened on the first day of testing. And that is the news that the Formula One Monaco Grand Prix will be changing to a mandatory 2-stop race. Now, at the recent meeting of the World Motorsport Council, they approved proposals for a mandatory 2-stop strategy at the Monaco Grand Prix. Now, the drivers will be required to use 3 sets of tyres throughout the race, and if the race is dry, a minimum of 2 different compounds. I'm kind of in 2 minds about this. One, I'm for it because do I feel like there needs to be some kind of change with Monaco? Yes. I'm not sure that that's the right change that needed to happen. It does feel like this change to the regulations for Monaco has come trying to fix a problem that was only really a problem last year. Obviously, last year we had the crash on lap 1. The race got red flagged. Everybody dived into the pits, got their tyres changed, and then just ran till the end of the race. That is a very specific problem that we encountered and one that we don't encounter a lot. So does it feel like this is trying to fix an issue that is not massively an issue? Yes. Does it feel a bit gimmicky? Yes. And I'll come on to that in a second. During the broadcast for testing, Bernie Collins had mentioned that there had been some simulations ran, and what she was intrigued to find out is if there would be any wording in the regulations about when your stops can be taken. I kind of agree but disagree on Bernie's statement here that she was saying that if you are a back marker, say you've either had a pretty poor qualifying or you're just a bit further down the grid just because that's your car, you could take your 2 pit stops on lap 1 and lap 2 and then run to the end of the race and gain track position through everyone else taking their pit stops. And I believe the simulations that were ran on that, you could gain 6 positions. Now, I agree that that is something that we don't want to see because that could mean that, you haven't ran a particularly good weekend, but you can end up getting track position through a strategy where others have ran a really good weekend and they sort of suffer for it. However, there is nothing stopping that happening now. The drivers are mandated to have at least 1 stop, and that could mean that you could take your 1 stop on lap 1 and then run to the end of the race and again gain track position through everyone else taking their pit stops. It might not be as many as 6 places, but you would still gain in that. I haven't read the actual regulations for Monaco with this change, so I'm not entirely too sure what the exact wording is. I don't think that's going to be an issue with drivers doing that. Maybe it will be. I think what's quite exciting is we're going into this year with it being a very big unknown because it's the first year that this is ever going to be mandated that you have to do 2 stops. It is something I think that could become quite dull anyway. And it does feel a little bit gimmicky, and I think we do need to be careful that we're not then just having different sets of regulations for different races throughout the calendar to suit those tracks. I've also seen a lot of backlash to this, not for trying to make racing better in Monaco, but based on the fact that there are other European races that are at threat of being put on rotation, namely the likes of Spa, that does have good racing, quite close racing, and the drivers have to take quite bold moves to get jobs done, and it's very exciting to watch why those tracks are under threat of going on rotation when Monaco, that is a procession and has been for a few years now, is able to stay on the calendar full time. And I hear ya, I get ya, and my answer to that is money. It is all down to money. A lot of tracks like Zandvoort, I believe, have pulled out of hosting races because they cannot afford to run a Grand Prix. maybe not run it, but like you have to pay to be on the calendar and all this kind of stuff. And it's a lot of money that you're forking up to be able to host an F1 Grand Prix. Monaco does have that. It is also a place where a lot of business is done. It is the glitz and the glamour. It is where business is done. If you want to impress someone, and if you want to do business with someone and, you know, wine and dine them and woo them and, you know, take them all these really nice places, Monaco's a perfect place to do that. It is the ideal place to do that. It attracts the stars. There is a lot of money flowing around that city. And it is the perfect place that if you want to entertain, of course it's Monaco. So it is also in the best interest of Formula One to have Monaco on the calendar because they can do all of this business and wooing and wining and dining. Same for the FIA, same for the teams. They can get things done in Monaco. Whilst the racing may be quite dull and probably will be fairly processional until if we ever get smaller cars, because if you look at F2, they have really close racing. It is actually beneficial for the teams, for the FIA, for Formula One itself to have Monaco on the calendar. So that it is what it is. I'm excited coming into Monaco this year to see how the teams how all the different teams adapt to this two-stop strategy. Will there be teams that take the gamble on maybe gaining those 6 or more, however many it is, places by doing a stop and a stop? It's an unknown in Formula One, and that means that we will probably get something quite entertaining from it. Whether or not that happens 2-3 years down the line, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I do agree that something needed to happen, but I do think we have to be very careful that we're not just changing regulations to suit races. We'll see what happens. I'm not opposed to it, but I do think it's maybe not the correct way to solve the bigger issue. I feel like we are just solving one specific problem that we had last year. We didn't have it the year before. Maybe it's a step in the right direction. Who knows? All right, diving into testing now, and we're going to go through each day and pick out sort of certain teams that we seem to have learned a little bit about. In terms of testing, I have to say, we as viewers don't know a whole lot after testing. We can only guess. We don't know what testing the teams are doing, what plans the teams are on, what engine modes, fuel loads. Well, we can kind of guess fuel loads because we can see when the cars look a bit heavier. We can see when they're doing aerodynamic testing through aero rakes or flow-vis paint, but we don't know what modes they're in, what they're actually testing for, all this kind of stuff. It is a bit of an unknown to us. I would also say that when you look at the timings for these sessions, don't get too carried away because, again, it is just testing. These timings are not really representative of what we will see when the cars hit the track in Melbourne in a few weeks. I do think that we will begin to see the outcome of testing probably from qualifying onwards is when we'll actually get a good gauge of these cars, because again, it's practice sessions. They are also running a lot of tests there. Qualifying is when we will begin to get a good gauge of the 2025 cars. Now, before we get into each of the 3 days, the way testing runs is you have 3 days, an AM session and a PM session, 4 hours for each session. The teams have one car with them and they will split those sessions up between their 2 drivers. A lot of the teams will do the 3 days split between the 2 drivers. So one will do an AM, one will do a PM, one will do an AM, one will do a PM, one will do an AM, one will do a PM. A couple of the teams will do a split day here or there and then do a full day for one driver and a full day for another driver. Williams did that. Red Bull did that. We'll come on and talk about that a bit later because I do have some bits to mention about that for Red Bull. And in actual fact, it's not a lot of time for these teams to be running these tests. It is the only time before the season starts that they can properly test these cars out on track. All the other times it's filming days and they are used very sparingly because they only have a certain amount of hours or length of running to do these filming days. So this is the real proper test and it's all or nothing really right now. If I was to pick a winner from testing overall, I would probably say McLaren, and on day one they seemed the team that was most comfortable. They were the most relaxed, they were in no real rush, they seemed pretty confident in what they were doing. It was actually, I think Piastri was the morning session. It was quite a while before he even got out on track to do any sort of push. The runs that he did before that, he had aero rakes on. They don't go incredibly fast because they don't want to do any damage to the aero rakes. They were in no real rush to rack up lap times. They did some aero running. They took some time in the garage to sort of analyse that data. And when they did finally reappear, Piastri put in a lot of work and Lando put in a lot of work later that evening. They were probably the team that was busiest. They really pushed that car hard. Very, very quick. And it was encouraging, I would say, for McLaren. Now, the headline lap times mean nothing because they're all on different engine modes, fuel loads, all this kind of stuff. However, as I said, McLaren looked the most comfortable and confident, seemed very sure in what they had done with their car for this year. Day one was a very good day for McLaren. All 3 days were actually very good days for McLaren, but just in terms of day one, a very good day at the track for that team. Mercedes, I would say, probably looked the second most impressive on day one. They were incredibly consistent. Antonelli and Russell both appeared confident in that car. They were both quite fast. The lap times were very encouraging when they were doing sort of push runs, and even their race runs seemed quite encouraging. The team seemed incredibly optimistic, which I didn't expect from Mercedes. I was quite cautious and thought they might play quite a cautious approach to how they spoke about the car and maybe not want to give too much away, but they seemed pretty optimistic. What was very nice to see was how confident Antonelli was in that car. He had obviously done quite a lot of TPC, testing previous cars. He had done obviously an FP1 session last year, and it just seems that he's embedded himself quite comfortably with the team. I will say that although he was confident, he did come across quite scruffy in his laps. However, that is something that actually quite a lot of the rookies were. They were all incredibly quite scruffy in their running of the cars. There looked to be a lot of what I would say was actually quite close to overdriving the cars. They definitely weren't as polished as their more seasoned counterparts. I wouldn't really expect them to be, but Antonelli really struggled around certain parts of the track, especially around turn 10. He had quite a big lock-up there. In terms of the other rookies quickly, I mean, I don't know what Behrman was doing because Haas was in a world of its own the whole 3 days. Hajar seemed to struggle quite a bit with the V-carb. He was, again, quite raggedy. Lawson struggled with that Red Bull. He had a huge spin coming around the first few corners. So the rookies were a bit messy, to say the least. But going back to Antonelli, he was quick and he said he was very happy with the car. And that is a good sign for Mercedes. Russell was the same. He was among the fastest in the second part of day one testing. He also relayed satisfaction with the Mercedes. He said it was the best that Mercedes has ever felt around Bahrain. And that, again, is very positive for Mercedes. However, there's one thing that's just kind of niggling in the back of my mind, and I imagine it's also niggling in the back of both the Mercedes drivers and that team, and that is how unusually cold it was in Bahrain. Maybe not cold, but cool. The temperatures were down, the track temp was down, there was rain, and these sort of cooler temperatures tend to suit Mercedes quite a bit in this current era. Remember last year they had quite a few struggles at the sort of warmer tracks, and then when we went to the likes of Vegas where it was late at night and the track was a lot cooler, they were absolutely flying. Russell had an incredible race. Hamilton had an incredible race that day. They do fare better with this style of car in the cooler conditions. What I imagine is maybe a little bit worrying is how that car is going to fare when we get to hotter temperatures. This is something that's niggling in the back of my mind, and I imagine, as I said, it is niggling in the back of Mercedes' mind. So it'll be interesting to see. They've had a fairly positive testing. How will that car get on once we get to hotter climates? Now, moving on to Ferrari. It was a very big moment for Ferrari these 3 days because this was Lewis Hamilton's first real test for the Scuderia in the 2025 car. Was it all encouraging and was it all smooth, plain sailing? Not entirely. Hamilton on the first day was about a second slower than Leclerc, coming in 9th overall. However, what I will say is he did complete 70 laps. It was at a different time of day. It was during the day, and the running that the drivers did during the day to the running that the drivers did at night, completely different conditions. We also don't know how much fuel each of the drivers was on when they set their fastest laps. So there is all that to take into consideration. I don't think we can jump the gun and say, hey, Hamilton's washed, he's just never going to get anywhere. He did have a few wide moments around turns 8 and 10 and a couple of snaps around turn 4, but he never stopped pushing, he never stopped attacking, which is positive because he's not getting himself down about it. I've said it before and I'll say it again, he looks the happiest he's been in a while. He seems quite confident, he seems settled in at Ferrari, which is nice to see. I wouldn't say that there is any reason for alarm bells yet, but day one wasn't the most positive, but again, there's a lot of unknown for us as viewers. Just quickly in the midfield cars before we move on to sort of day 2, I have to say there seemed to be a huge sense of relief down at Alpine, and I don't blame them, considering this time last year they had an overweight and incredibly slow car. It's like night and day between last year and this year. Gasly was comfortably lapping within the top 6. Is there huge differences to the car that we've seen at the end of last year in like Abu Dhabi to the car that we've seen in testing this year? Probably not, but that's also not the worst thing considering how strong Gasly was at the end of last year. So positive things going on down at Alpine. Onto VCarb, they looked quite solid on the track. The car seemed to move decently enough. I will say their pace was a little bit off and there was a couple of handling issues, nothing to cause concern. It was mostly just in the hands of Hadjar, and I will say that that is, again, just a rookie kind of thing. So I'm not worried about VCarb yet. Williams, I have to say, I think Williams looked much better than expected. Both those drivers seemed pretty confident in that car, and that car seemed nimble, agile, faster than expected. Again, can we take too much from that at testing? Probably not, but I'm taking it and running with it. Do I think that they might be a dark horse? Perhaps. We then have Haas, who was the slowest car on all 3 days, but as I said, they were just kind of in a world of their own. They seem to be running completely different programs to everyone else. They seem to be doing lots of high fuel running, so we cannot compare Haas to the rest of the field, I don't think. And when you look at the lap times, I don't think you can compare what each of those drivers did to the rest. I don't think it's representative, to be quite frank. Both the drivers have said that the car is a step forward from last year's. Obviously, Esteban Ocon took part in the post-season testing in Abu Dhabi. Oliver Bearman took part in 2 races with the team. So it's nice to see that there seems to be something, you know, a step forward for the team. However, it is unclear just how much of a step forward the team has taken. And then quickly, just before we move on, Sauber is actually the slowest car. Out of all 10 teams, that seems to be, again, the slowest car. And also, it is the worst livery. I don't know what's happened, but it looks a complete mess. The renders that we had this lovely gradient look, and there is not a gradient in sight. They really butchered that car, I have to say, and it's actually a little bit embarrassing. We also got quite an unusual stop to the running during day 1. We got a red flag for an hour because we got a power cut. One of 3 quite bizarre red flags across the weekend. About 5 p.m. local time, all the power went out around the circuit, from the floodlights around the track to the paddock to the garages, and it just sort of reminded me how unserious this sport is sometimes. All of the drivers and mechanics just running around with torches. It was all just it just gave me very unserious vibes. And as I said, it was out for an hour. It took an hour to resolve, and we did get an extra hour of running. I don't know how much we needed that extra hour of running. I mean, I say that as me. I'm not you know, the one running the tests for an F1 team. So our other two red flags were both on day 3, both quite bizarre. One was caused by Oliver Bearman, who managed to flick up a stone from the track, apparently, that smashed a panel of glass at the trackside gantry, the gantry where they control the starting lights, and that smashed a panel of glass onto the track, and we had to get a guy out with a brush to sweep it all up. And the third red flag came later on day 3 when the session was stopped because there was a bus. A small bus transporting personnel around the circuit took a wrong turn and ended up on the track at turn 10 in the runoff area. I can't believe how mental, I can't express how mental that is. And it is incredibly dangerous for a bus to be in the runoff area during a live testing session. The fact that it is possible for that to even happen, I am lost for words. But yes, 3 days of testing, 3 very bizarre red flags. We also got the official class of 2025 photo of all the drivers, and I have to say maybe that's why we got a power cut, because it was incredibly bright. I also think that the mixture of seating and standing, the levels, the heights were not played with correctly. It all looked a bit weird. Why is Charles Leclerc sitting so far away from everyone else? It was all just a bit odd. I'm not a big fan of this year's photo. Moving on to day 2 of testing. And I want to kick things off with Ferrari. Now, after day 1, I was a little bit worried. They just seemed a bit off the pace. Hamilton seemed to struggle a little bit. And I went into day 2 feeling a little bit worried, but I have to say, I did calm down quite a lot, because I think Ferrari emerged as a force to be reckoned with throughout day 2. Hamilton was on good form. He was very happy with the progress he's making with the team in terms of settling in and his performance on track. He was very positive with the media. His best lap on day 2 was 0.2 seconds off the 2024 pole time that was set by Max Verstappen. 2 teams had actually told an F1 reporter that what they know of their own respective teams and what others are capable of, that Ferrari are definitely at the top of the pile. But remember that it is only testing, and that the top of that pile is going to be incredibly tight. Hamilton looked incredibly confident in the car. He got a much better response, and he did quite a bit of media on day 2, and everything just seemed to be incredibly positive, which is nice to see. And I do feel like he is sending quite a clear, strong message that the Hamilton we've seen of the past couple of years, seasons, is not the Hamilton that we are going to see at Ferrari, which is quite exciting. McLaren, again, the team looked good, but a few issues seemed to rear their head, one being rear instability. And it seemed to be an issue that plagued both the drivers throughout the day, with the car looking a little bit inconsistent. As the day went on, the car did get better, but there was still a little bit of instability. But Norris said that it was very manageable. Norris didn't set the fastest lap time on day 2, but was comfortably quicker overall. Williams, I think Williams seemed to have done the work to take the step forward to sort of be at the front of that midfield. Carlos did a full day on day 2, and he was quickest overall, which I wasn't expecting. He was actually quickest over the entire weekend. So Williams' podium, I'm trying not to get too ahead of myself. I also can't imagine that the likes of Williams is going to be faster than the McLaren. But it does seem like Williams has taken the right step forward. And I don't believe that they are going to be the quickest car, but I do believe that they could be a little bit of a dark horse this season, after a disappointing 2024. It has excited me for the team and what they could achieve in 2025, and I'm hoping that there is going to be a much better year in store for Williams. I think what will help them is they will come into the rest of 2025 with a very strong driver pairing. They're not, hopefully, not going to be as many crashes or reliability issues or anything with that car. Hopefully the morale and the spirits of the team is lifted a little bit. And I do think that will be the case with Carlos having joined, and quite a positive 3 days of testing, I think, will be fairly morale boosting for the Williams team. During day 2, Sauber was definitely the worst car on the grid yet again. They do seem to have tamed the car after day 1, but even with all those changes, it still seems an incredibly tricky car and just incredibly off the pace. Bortoleto really struggled to get the car to do the same thing lap on lap. They don't look miles away from everyone else, but they just don't look like they're going to be a real threat to anyone, to be quite frank. Haas, once again, seem to be doing their own thing out there. Again, doing a lot of high fuel running, and when you look at the timings, they look to be completely off the pace, but again, I don't think it's fully representative. We all questioned and probably laughed at Haas and Aston Martin when Pirelli released the tyre compounds that were going to be used throughout the 3 days of testing and the team allocation, what they had all chosen, and we've seen that Haas and Aston Martin had actually picked intermediates, but turns out they were right, because we got rain during day 2 of testing and Haas was the only team that managed to go out during the rainfall. They stuck a pair of intermediate boots on and out they went, which is incredibly good for Haas because they've managed to gain just a little bit of data, other data that the teams won't have, the rest of the teams won't have. So well done, Haas. Making good judgment calls, I see. Moving on to testing, day 3. Again, for the third day, McLaren came out incredibly strong. They actually made it a 3 for 3 with smooth, productive days. Reliability on the car seemed incredibly good. The car looked strong, quickest in low fuel, and they also lead in terms of race pace. They were 0.21 seconds faster in their quali runs and 0.15 seconds faster in their race pace. There is still a little bit of rear instability in the car, and there is some concerns over its rear wing. Now we'll come on to that in a little minute, but overall a very strong 3 days of testing for McLaren, and they definitely seem to be the team to beat going into the 2025 season, and I'm excited to see what they can do. This definitely seems to be, I think before we even got to testing, Lando Norris was the bookies' favourite for the Drivers' Champion, and I think McLaren might have been the bookies' favourite for the Constructors. They are my favourite, and I know in my my predictions, I had said that Ferrari will win the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, sorry. I'm still sticking with that, but I definitely think that they will have some stiff competition from McLaren. They seem to be the ones that are the most confident, the most comfortable with their car. They've not really had any big issues, and they are the fastest out there. As I said, I think their chief rival definitely is Ferrari. It was a very encouraging pre-season test with both drivers getting to grip of the 2025 Challenger fairly quickly. Leclerc looked super smooth all 3 of his tests. Hamilton also looked very good across his 3 sessions, albeit his day 3 session ended early after there was an anomaly on the telemetry spotted, so not quite sure what that was, but this is a team that will be fighting for Grand Prix wins and potentially a championship. So I'm very excited for the year ahead for Ferrari and for Charles and Lewis. I've actually just realised through this whole thing we've not spoke about Red Bull once, apart from that little spin that Liam Lawson had. I think Red Bull has problems. The technical director for the Red Bull team admitted that their tests weren't as smooth as they expected and that the car wasn't responding how they wanted it to. When the car hit the track, it was clear that the launch images and the shakedown imagery, etc., weren't an illusion, and that the RB21, their 2025 Challenger, looked pretty much exactly the same as the RB20, not just in terms of the livery design, but actually the actual car itself. That being said, there was lots of changes happening to the Red Bull over the weekend, with Friday's car probably being the closest spec to what we'll see out in Australia. Obviously, I mentioned Liam Lawson doing all day Thursday and Max doing all day Friday, and I do feel slightly bad for Liam Lawson because it is geared in Max's favour. Max took the full day on the Friday, which suits him because all the developments were on the car, and it was the most spec ready for what we'll see in Australia, and Liam just didn't get to test any of that stuff. I also feel bad because he did get limited running on the Thursday, Liam Lawson, because they spent a lot of time in the garage trying to fix a water leak with the car. Verstappen also, to be fair, on the Friday did manage to he did limited race runs due to the Red Bull being nowhere near ready on the Friday. They were still doing a variety of setups, different wing and floor combinations. It was constant down in that garage. On the Friday, Red Bull were running tests right up until the final moments, with Verstappen spending the majority of the session out in Floves and doing small little test runs so that they could check the components of the car. In the final moments of day 3, Verstappen did find a combination that worked for him, but it didn't look easy for him to control that car. So I do think there is some issues that Red Bull need to sort out before that track hits the car, before that car hits the track in Australia. I also just want to touch on Haas quickly, because they did mostly long runs throughout all 3 days, and again, they appeared at the bottom of the timesheet. One issue that will need to be sorted by that team, and it needs to be fixed before Melbourne, is a strange bodywork problem that has happened twice now. Once at the team shakedown in Silverstone, happened to Esteban Ocon, and then again in Bahrain for Oliver Bearman. Pieces of the bodywork of the car have flown off twice now. Haas have said it shouldn't be a problem. I do wonder if they were trying to reduce the weight of the car by not having as many fittings to sort of keep these bits in place, and whether it is an easy fix and they just need to put a few more bolts down. But definitely a problem that they will need to fix before they get to Melbourne. Earlier on in the episode, we spoke about the rear wings, and I hope you're all ready for Mini DRS War Round 2, because it definitely has begun. Over the 3 days of testing, the teams have begun to dig into what the other teams are doing, and let's just say eyebrows have been raised over the behaviour of some of the team's rear wings. Onboard footage from the rear focusing cameras have highlighted some interesting behaviours, with wings like that of the Mercedes appearing to noticeably bend backwards on the straights before popping back into place when the car slows down for the corners. The Red Bull technical director pointed out that some other rear wing flexi tricks have been spotted, raising suspicions that many of the teams could be trying to exploit the Mini DRS benefit that McLaren had last year. So expect, going into Melbourne and the first sort of few races, there being a lot of talk of this Mini DRS. Now, if you cast your minds back to 2024, to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, there was a lot of talk about the McLaren rear wing and how down the straight it almost opened a little bit, which would reduce the drag on the car, meaning that it would go faster down the straights without actually having to activate the DRS, which they couldn't do because they were maybe not within the second of the car in front, or they were just outside the DRS zones. With Oscar Piastri winning that Grand Prix, it became a hot point for a lot of McLaren's rivals, with, I believe it was Red Bull, saying quite a bit about the rear wing. The FIA got involved. McLaren was at no fault. Their rear wing was perfectly legal. However, to stop the drama from escalating, they'd made changes to their rear wing. They basically just didn't use that rear wing for any of the races left in the season. And to be fair, it was only a rear wing that they would have probably used in Vegas and in none of the other races, but they just took it upon themselves to say, listen, we'll just not use it. I do believe that quite a few of the teams will have looked at it, and it is obviously legal, so why shouldn't we do it? And with it being the final year of the regulations, you'll find a lot of the teams trying to exploit little bits just to gain that last bit of momentum before all the regs change. So interesting, we shall see what happens with that, but I have to apologise about the lighting. It's all over the place, but I definitely think that we will see a lot of talk about these Mini DRS wings. And that is everything from testing. I have to say there are some clear winners and some clear losers throughout these 3 days. I would say for the winners, you're definitely looking at McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, albeit that the conditions are a lot different to what we will see later. I'm intrigued to see how they fare in the hotter climates. I would definitely say Williams is an underdog, and I think Alpine have looked quite strong. I would say Haas, we can't tell whether they're a winner or a loser because they were just in their own little world doing their own little thing. In terms of losers, definitely Sauber. They are by far the slowest car. Red Bull definitely seem to have some problems. VCarb, I would say VCarb's pace is fairly similar to that of the Cyber, just the car is a bit of a better handle. And Aston Martin, who we basically see nothing of. And I would say Aston Martin, it's a little bit worrying that their car wasn't the best in 2024, and Fernando Alonso has come forward and said that their car for 2025 is exactly where the 2024 car was in Abu Dhabi. So it's going to be an interesting start to the season for those 4 teams. I have to say that the 2025 Formula One season looks nail-bitingly close, and if I had to do a championship prediction right now after testing, before seeing any competitive running, I would say in P10 would definitely be Sauber, P9 Aston Martin, mostly just because we haven't seen much of them, and I can't imagine they'd be worse than Sauber, but I can't say that they'd be any better than any of the teams I put in front of them. VCarb, I would say, coming in P8, Haas P7, Williams P6, Alpine P5. Then I think it would be Red Bull, Mercedes in P3, Ferrari P2, and McLaren for a championship win. Again, this is testing. We don't know much, and we'll just have to see what happens. But very exciting going into the season opener in Melbourne. We also have the next season of Drive to Survive coming out on Friday. So we will be back just after that to talk about our thoughts and feelings and the dramatisation of an already dramatic 2024. But that is everything from us. Let us know what your thoughts and feelings are after the 3 days of testing in the comments. We'll be back very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. I love you. Bye.